My text is Ephesians 5:21 to 33, a biblical description of marriage and, of course, the church's relationship to Christ. It begins with these words: submit to one another out of reverence to Christ. Wives, submit to your husbands. And then later, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Each person in marriage submits to the other. That's marriage. And I would argue that problems in marriage arise when one or both parties refuse to submit to the other in reverence to Christ. But we are Americans, and we don't want to submit to anybody. It comes with a lot of negative connotations, that word submit. To our minds, submit means to lose, to become subservient, to give up your freedom and surrender your will to the lead of a tyrant who would tax our tea, eat our steak, and ruin our lives. We don't like the word submit, and yet it is key to success in marriage and key to success in life in general. I think we should examine that word submit a little more closely. The Greek word that we translate as submit doesn't have the negative connotations. It's a compound word which is pronounced hypotasso. You recognize the first part, I'm sure, hypo, from things like hypodermic needle, which means a needle that goes under the derma, or the skin. So hypo means under. And tasso, the other half of that compound word, means to arrange, to order, to organize. So, in ancient Greek, if a Greek person told you to hypotasso or hypotasso, he would be telling to get yourself in order. If you were in a gym class and the ancient Greek gym teacher told you to hypotasso, he would mean toe the line. If you're in the army, that means that you would know your rank and respect the ranks of others and obey your superiors. Hypotasso. Put yourself in the order. If you're setting a formal meal, setting dinner plates, would be where the silverware goes and the cups and all that. Hypotasso, in order. But what does that have to do with marriage? Is there a proper order for marriage which we should place ourselves in? Yes, there is. Well then, who decided what this order would be? God did, when he created us. God created the order of marriage. He also created the order of many things in the world. Let's go into a time machine back to the days of creation. What are the words that are used to describe things before creation started? The earth was without form and void. There was no order, no structure. But with his powerful word, God applied order, created order. For instance, he created light and darkness, night and day, the rhythm of the world, and therefore the rhythm of our lives. That is an order. And if we maintain that order and sleep at night and work during the day, we are at our best. If you try to reverse it, science has demonstrated, it's hard on the human body. We quite naturally submit or hypotasso to the order of day and night. It's good. Then God made what Genesis describes as the lights in heavens, sun, moon, stars, planets, saying that they would mark the seasons. We live not only in light and darkness, but in seasons. This is the order of things established by God, each season offering its purpose and meaning, again, we quite naturally and without complaining hypotasso to this. God would also create things in nature made nature to operate on certain rules and principles, like gravity, friction, inertia, physical properties, chemical properties, properties of light, time, space. All of these things are part of the order that God created. In order to survive, we must learn these properties and hypotasso, that is, submit to the order. Much of childhood play is about learning to respect these laws of nature, and in particular, mostly gravity. God also created the sky, the land, and the sea, ordered reality in this way for us. They're not all mixed together like they are on planet Jupiter. There are distinct and separate environs which would be filled with distinct and different creatures. Fish cannot live on land. Birds cannot live underwater. Human beings cannot fly. This is the order of life forms on earth. And without much thought, we submit to it. And then God made human beings. And he said, it's not good for the man to be alone. That's part of the order. I will make a helper fit for him. Male and female, he created them. A man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Be fruitful, multiply. And here we see the order of humanity, the basis for human society. It's about men and women coming together in marriage, pledging themselves to each other, forming a home, and God willing, having children. This is the structure of all humanity. And as the family goes, so goes the household. As the family goes, so goes the city, the state, the country, and the world. This is God's order for humanity, family-based. But it's even beyond that. God also provides us things to safeguard humanity and human society. We call it government. Whenever human beings are gathered, you will find that they come to terms and form some sort of government. God built that into us. And God commands that we hypotasso, or submit to the order which he provided. He tells us that governments exist as his will and that they serve him. And if we want to avoid trouble, we're wise to hypotasso. To many, in our time especially, it seems like the world that used to understand this no longer understands the order of things. People are beginning to say that the world is dissolving into chaos. It's not uncommon to hear people insist that there is no truth, that there is no right or wrong, that each person kind of makes up his own creation, creates his own reality, his own morals, regardless of how much he hurts himself and others. We now have in this nation a divorce rate of 50%. God's order for marriage is not being honored. We also have men telling us that they're women and women telling us that they're men and punishing us if we do not play their game. Marriage and family and sexuality are all being redefined in ways that are inimical to what God has put together. So what's going on anyway? Well, obviously, the evil one is at work. He is, in fact, the author of every wicked philosophy and belief that has led to the rejection of God's order. No, the evil one hasn't changed the rising and the setting of the sun, nor has he touched gravity or inertia or any of that other stuff. All the physical and magnetic properties of the earth still function. No, as typical for the evil one, he went for the weakest link. He's gone after the weaker part of God's creation, sinful human souls that descended from Adam. Because of original sin, we are all very receptive to his temptations that he proffers. And we're seeing the results and the destructive work in real time, as our nation at times seems to boil with rage over good order that God created. But there is one who joined us who did not rage against what God had wrought. When he was 12, they found him in the temple teaching the teachers of Israel. His parents said, "Come home with us." And it says, the word is there, he hypotassoed himself. He submitted to his mother and father, because to be a human being like us, he had to be under God's law, and that was the order of creation. Children obey their parents, and Jesus did this as a child. Even though he was the Son of God, he submitted to their parental authority. Jesus also submitted to the authority of the Roman government, which was corrupt. They asked him, "Should we pay our taxes?" And he said, "Show me the coin, you pay the tax." And this picture is Caesar. He says, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God's what is God's." He supported the order of the government, even though it was somewhat perverse at that time. He was every bit a human as we are. And he came to die, not for his sin, but for our sin. The sins of a chaotic humanity, bent on redefining themselves against God, bent on self-destruction. Jesus actually married himself to the human race, sacrificed himself, gave up everything so that he might wash us with water and the word, cleanse us, restore our wicked desires, to live outside the order and refuse to submit to what God has made. Jesus was God's answer to the chaos that has infected the human race ever since sin entered it. In Jesus, Jesus is called the Word made flesh. In Jesus, God would speak to the chaotic world so as to bring back order, and the order of salvation, by forgiving people who have chosen to be their own gods. We see that same Greek word again as Peter talks about where the risen Jesus is now in his epistle. He says, Jesus has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God, with angels and authorities and powers having been hypotassoed to him. Do you understand what that means? So regardless of how chaotic things may appear, Jesus is in charge. And God's will ultimately be done. And no matter how horrible evil may appear, it ultimately cannot win. Creation will ultimately be restored. You and I will be restored, and are being restored even now by the washing and the forgiveness of our sins. And we're not only preserved for the future, but we also are able to take part in preserving and carrying out God's plan. When Jesus sent out 72 disciples on a trial run early in his ministry, they came back with much excitement. And they said, "Lord, even the demons are subject," same word, hypotassoed, "to us in your name." So, as the world seems to descend into chaos under the direction of the evil one, you don't have to. It is not inevitable. You do not have to give in. You do not have to accept or explain Satan's chaotic schemes. You can actually push back. And if God has seen fit to give you a family and a marriage, the fight back can start right in the home. Dedicating yourself, submitting yourselves to one another can make for a long-lasting, love-filled marriage, and in general, happy, more well-adjusted children. Through the act of submitting to each other and the order of marriage, there are blessings for us, but I think there are also blessings for our confused nation. We live in a very weird and abnormal time, at least in our memories. The world has been just this bad many times through history, but to us, in our frame of reference, it's horribly weird. People are mixed up and quite distressed. The normalcy of traditional marriage and family built upon mutual submission and love as God designed is really part of that city on the hill that Jesus talked about, an oasis in a desert of chaos, inviting others to see and to learn and to want. One of the things I've noticed in talking to people in their 20s, early 20s, is they want to have things the way they used to be. They're talking that way amongst themselves. So it's working. So if you, your husband and your wife, focus on submitting to one another in marriage, there will be people who go to school on that. So we are called not to follow the world, but to be an example to the world, honoring marriage, honoring our father and mother, honoring the order which God has put up. Amen.